We light the candle of witness this morning for our Rooted in Love 2022 annual pledge campaign, and I'm so delighted to invite a dear friend of this congregation and friend of mine, Gina Ludlow, to come forward. Come on up, Gina. She's here with her husband, Mark. Welcome to both of you. This isn't your first time speaking here at First Church, but I just want to introduce you again to everybody. Gina Ludlow is a co-chair for Fairfield's Working for Racial Justice and Equity Task Force. So if you've been listening into those meetings, Patrina Cash is also on that team, and if you've been listening into those meetings, you'll know her voice very well. But Gina is a tireless advocate for racial justice in Fairfield, and David and I invited her to come speak to you all as part of our annual pledge campaign to give you a new perspective on what First Church means to the wider community. So I will light the candle, and thank you so much for being here to speak to all of us, Gina.
Good morning. Good morning. My name's Gina Ludlow, and I'm your neighbor. And I came today because Vanessa asked me to talk a little bit about what the church means to the wider community. And I go back to March 2020, when my life and all of our lives changed inexplicably. All of a sudden, my world became very, very small. My days were about Zoom calls and cleaning and fear. I retreated to my family and to a place of such unease. And there was so much fear and displacement during that time. And when I thought that my life had reached the bottom of despair, in May of 2020, the floor fell out. And once again, we had to take a really deep look at who we were as a people. At that time, I felt as though my connection to my ancestors was never felt more, but it was though I was ripped out at the root. And all of a sudden, those things that went so deep were exposed to the world with nowhere to go. And in that time, I got an email, and someone asked me to just get on a Zoom call with some local leaders in the community. And I met David and Vanessa. And we would have these phone calls where we would just talk about what we could do as a community, what we could do as people to connect, to find that place of love, to build the roots and put them back in the ground where they needed to be. It was through those calls I became affiliated with the Racial Justice and Equity Task Force, which has been a very challenging but worthwhile expedition for myself and for the community. Unfortunately, again, it's brought out some deep, dark discomfort from a lot of sides, from both sides of the world, people who really are passionate about making the world a more equitable place and people who are passionate about keeping it the same. And again, in that place of despair, I found lots of solace with my new friend, Vanessa. We would talk sometimes, and those calls would remind me of why we need to do the things we need to do, how we need to bring love back into the world. So in that period of time, a number of things happened. There was a Zoom bombing here where the task force was attacked online. There was an incident in Weston. And so a lot of people across the county got together to talk about what we could do to bring the love back into the world. And someone talked about George Floyd 1 year later presentation that they were going to be doing in their community at their church. And as they were talking, I started to think about how we could connect not just with the people who lived here, but across the community. And I was wondering, how could we do that? And I wondered for about a half second, because once again, Vanessa popped into my mind. And I drive by this church all the time, and I see that sign out front that says, "This is a place of yes." And I sent her an email and said, "Is this something that we could possibly do?" And she said, "Yes, I don't know how, but I'll get back to you." And she made it happen. And we met here out on the lawn. And for me and many others, it was our first time out of our homes after a year, our first time out of that darkness that began back in March. And out on the front steps of this church, people got up and talked about how important the changes that they were trying to put into place were. They talked about their experiences. They talked about what it felt like to be themselves. And all of a sudden, these connections started to happen through these strangers. And some were congregants and some were not. But it reminded me of those root systems, those trees that you see them all separately, but beneath the surface, they're actually one organism. And it felt so much like that is what was happening at the time. Katrina and I had been on this task force for months, and I'd never met her in person until that day. There were a number of people I'd never met until that day. But I needed that in that time to remember my connection to why I do this work, my connection to this community, my connection to these neighbors and friends I haven't met yet that became part of my circle of love. And so I came here today to just let you know that that day when I stood out in front and was able to say that my life matters and that the lives of everyone in this community matters, it brought me back to this connection of where I am rooted. The love that has come from my ancestors, from my friends, from my family, and from you that I have not met. And so to you, I say thank you for allowing me to be part of your community, to know that I could come here at any time to feel that connection. And this place is important and needs to continue to do the wonderful things that it does.